Hey everyone, David here from the Five and Dime, and I'm about to do my first faux stone or faux marble top. So these little French provincial bedside tables and tables, whatever you want to call them, are lovely and I think they're fantastic, but I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do on the top that didn't compete with the body inside, so I decided I would go for a stone look. I've never done this before. So I watched Amy Howard at home and one of her tutorials on YouTube, and by watching that, I adapted it to Dixie Belle products, and I'm going to show you how I did this. I'm no expert, but I think it turned out pretty good. So stay tuned and follow along as I go through the steps and process. So the first part of this is going to be creating your glazes. I am mixing 1 part water, 1 part satin clear coat, and for this color, 1 part stormy seas. And you're going to mix that really well. And first, you need to lay down your base color, which my base color is Silk All-in-One Mineral Paint in the color White Cap. So I have my white base. So this is going to be like a Carrara marble-ish. The second part of this is that you're going to need a sea sponge. I don't have a sea sponge, and I wanted to get this done. So I took one of the gray applicator pad things that you use for applying top coats, etc. And I picked it apart. I picked out pieces of it so that it was more sea sponge-ish, maybe. You know what? It worked out pretty good though, I must say. The other part you're going to need are some clean, lint-free rags. Now you're going to dip that in your glaze and you're going to bring that down and you're going to do it on the diagonal because it wouldn't naturally run top to bottom or side to side. So you start creating a pattern and you want to turn your sponge every now and then as well. You don't want complete coverage. You kind of want to have that done in random and make sure you load up and tamp off a bit, and some will be a little bit darker and some will be a bit lighter, and you'll have some negative space. The white spots we're going to call negative spaces. The next step is you're going to take your lint-free cloth and you're going to ball it up so it's smooth-ish. Do you know what I mean? You don't want it to have a pattern on it now. Then you're going to start mushing your paint around a little bit. And I do find that it helps if your rag is just a little bit damp. And this is going to help to move the paint. You're not trying to really lift it. You're trying to shift it and move it. So you're getting variations of color and you're trying to kind of go into where those white spots are and spread it out so you get the variation in color. I apologize that my shoulder is a major part in all of this right now. A key part of making this look realistic is making sure that you go around your edges as well. This has a curved or routed edge on it, so you want to make sure that those edges are taken care of as well. I found having my misting bottle on hand was kind of important to this as well. The key here is that you want the open time or the wetness of it to be active as long as possible. And I just found that the misting bottle just helped to keep it open enough that I was able to come back and really work with it so that I was able to move the paint around without having to worry about it drying in spot. If you find your rag is starting to place down more paint than it's picking up or moving, time to change rags. It's really important that each step of the process is dry before moving on to the next step. You can speed up the process by using a heat gun or a hair dryer. If I were using a heat gun, I would be just very careful of the fact that the heat gun can overheat, whereas hair dryer works beautifully. Next step is to add some white back into it. Now, remember my base is the Silk All-in-One Mineral Paint in the color White Cap. So I didn't know how silk would work with trying to create this effect. So I picked out cotton, which of course is the chalk mineral paint equivalent to it, to create my glaze. The recipe for this glaze, similar to the first one, is 1 part paint, 1 part top coat, 1 part water. I am making a larger batch of this because I'll be using this white glaze a number of times through the process because this is all about layers. There's multiple layers on this. For the white glaze, I'm using a high density foam roller. It's important that I get this complete coverage across the whole thing. And remember, we've made a glaze so it is transparent to a degree. Again, for a more realistic look, you have to remember your edges as well. That's going to be key to this looking really good. Once it's applied all over, again, taking that lint-free cloth and you're going to start patting it off. And this is going to give you that layered look. So you'll start seeing the colors from below starting to peek through. So again, this is all about layers. So in total, I think there's about 7 or 8 layers that I end up putting on of the colors. So 3 colors, but multiple layers. So just dab it off, and again, don't forget your edges. Now it's moving on to the next step, which is allowing this one to dry as well. Again, between each of the different colors or the different layers, we need to make sure it's 100% dry. For this next step, I'm making another glaze. This glaze is key and very important, so pay attention really well. I'm using the color Caviar, and this one, because it's going to be the color of my veining, I'm mixing it a little different. This is 1 part paint to 1 part of the glazing liquid or the satin clear coat, and it's going to be 3 parts water. You're going to have this one be much runnier than the other one because you want it much more transparent than the rest. The veining isn't always a solid line, so that transparency is going to be really important. I'm going to mix that really well because you got to make sure this is mixed up really well. And then to the original Stormy Seas glaze that we created earlier, which was 1 part water, 1 part paint, 1 part the satin clear coat, I'm going to add just a bit of the Caviar to it to deepen it up. So this will be actually 4 different colors using 3 different paints. Following the first glaze we put down, which was the Stormy Seas, we're going to follow the exact same process. And again, we're continuing in the diagonal pattern. Add as much or as little of the darker color that you want. This is where it starts coming down to being a matter of preference and the overall look that you're going for. I'm adding quite a bit. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. Again, you're going to follow the same process as you did last time with moving this paint around with one of the lint-free rags. So a little bit of misting water does go a long ways in it. I didn't think you were supposed to, but I found it actually worked better having the misty bottle on hand. So again, just move the paint around, placing it down. If you find that your lint-free rag is putting more down than it's picking up, change rags again. So you may go through a number of rags doing this process. Keep going until you get the look that you're looking for. And again, don't forget those edges. It's going to be very important you do it, or else you're coming back trying to clean up hard edges along the edge. It just doesn't look right. We're going to take the hairdryer now and completely dry this layer as well. Everything has to be dry before you move to each step. We're now going to give it another coat of the white glaze, and this we're going to use the high density foam roller to apply it all over the top, and then we're going to start ragging it off again. So again, just taking your lint-free rag and you're going to dab at it to bring it out. So this way you're starting to see the layers coming through it as well. Again, we're going to dry this really well before moving on to the next step. Once you're happy with your stone, you can start doing your veining. And I'm using one of Dixie Belle's artist brushes, and I'm using one of the super fine ones. And you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm actually pushing it as opposed to painting with it, if you will. So I'm pushing that and kind of twisting it a little bit as I go along to create my veining. I'm also following some of the darker lines that are in my semi-transparent glaze that's below it. So it looks like it's following a bit of a line there. A turkey feather or some type of feather like that is what you should be using for this. I didn't have one and I don't have a turkey, so this is what I used. This was another step I found worked really well because you're working with a glaze that has a bit of open time. And remember, this one is much waterier, looser. We'll go with waterier. And what I'm able to do with this is I'm actually able to take one of my synthetic brushes by Dixie Belle and I'm able to feather it out. So the veining has a really soft look below it, and then add that veining back on top of it and it has a little deeper look. So if you watch, I'm just pushing it and kind of wherever it kind of goes. And I'm kind of following a pattern, but it's more or less just go. Intersect lines. But again, remember that we have everything running on the diagonal. This is crucial, that everything follows that same pattern. And don't forget your edges. Again, you want this to look pretty realistic. And if you've got a curve that comes down, you're going to want to make sure that your marble comes down, your veining comes down over the edge as well. So again, to recap my veining color, this is 1 part caviar to 1 part satin clear coat and 3 parts water, which is why this one is much more transparent and I'm able to really feather it out with the synthetic brush to just give it that softer edge. I also found it was really good to get a piece of marble if you have one, or look it up on, bring your iPad close so that you can actually take a look and say, okay, well, would it run naturally this way or that way, or how would it go typically? And I found that was a great source for me just to look at and get a bit of an idea. Once you're happy with how your veining looks, then come in and dry it really well again before we move on. If you find any of your veining a little too dark, then just come back with your white glaze that you created and using your rag, pounce it on a little bit and just layer it over it again. Dry it really well before we move to the next step. Now it's time to start adding the top coats. And yes, multiple layers. So I'm starting off with the satin clear coat because I want to make sure I have a good surface for my gator hide. Because this is a tabletop, I'm then going to add 3 coats of gator hide, drying in between each one, sanding between each one as well to make sure I have a very smooth and glossy surface. After 3 coats of gator hide, I ended up with 2 coats of gloss by Dixie Belle Paint Company so that I could get a really shiny surface. I wanted this to look like it was a polished marble, and this worked out really well. I did sand in between each of the coats as well. To further embellish this, I took the Moonshine Metallics in Gold Digger, and using that same fine artist brush, I just gently, very gently applied a gold line along the veining as well. Once this part was done, I came in and I dried it as well, and then added another coat of gloss on top of this. So this gave it just the right amount of shine and shimmer, and I think it's turned out pretty good so far. So thank you, Amy Howard, for your instructions. And although I adapted them to be Dixie Belle products that I used and didn't have all the tools that I needed, I think it's turned out beautiful. I think the tops look really nice. And you know what? I think this is something easy enough that anybody can do. This was my first attempt, and I have to say I'm really pleased. All right, ciao for now.